Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good whatever time of the day it is you happen to be watching. In this video, we're going to take a little wander around the district of Smithfield in the City of London, just a stone's throw from St. Paul's Cathedral. It's an enclave that's got over 1,000 years of history crackling away around its ancient streets. It's got tales of plague, of revolting peasants, of executions and body-snatchers. Sherlock Holmes puts in an appearance, as does the Blitz, and the Great Fire of London even flares up from time to time. It's got the city's most haunted pub, one of Western Europe's oldest hospitals, not to mention the oldest parish church in the City of London. In fact, it's got just about everything a curious wayfarer could hope to encounter. I can't wait to start exploring it. So let's begin our journey here outside the Old Bailey, or the Central Criminal Court, to give it its correct title. The building is one of several Crown Courts and hears major criminal cases from within the Greater London area, although trials can also be referred here from other parts of England and Wales. Famous trials to have been heard here include those of William Joyce, or Lord Haw-Haw, as he was better known during the Second World War, when his clipped tones broadcast Nazi propaganda from Germany to the United Kingdom, Ruth Ellis, the last woman to be hanged in the UK, the Crays, and Peter Sutcliffe, the so-called Yorkshire Ripper, to name but a few. Members of the public can attend the trials here, although stringent security measures apply. For example, no mobile phones, bags or cameras are allowed inside the building. Old Bailey is in fact the name of the street in which the court stands, and the site of the building was until 1902 the site of Newgate Prison, one of London's most notorious and infamous places of incarceration. It was in the square in front of the prison that public executions were carried out from the late 18th century to 1868, in which year, on the 26th of May, Fenian Michael Barrett became the last person to be publicly hanged in England. Executions were seen as a major form of entertainment, and as many as 40,000 people could arrive in the square to witness one when it took place. So dense could the crowd be that it wasn't unheard of for people to be crushed to death by its sheer force. Pubs in the vicinity used to do a roaring trade on execution days, and those that overlooked the prison, such as the Magpie and Stump, now part of this modern office complex, although a pub has stood here since the 1550s, would even offer execution breakfasts whereby wealthy patrons could hire the upper floors and enjoy a hearty breakfast washed down with copious amounts of ale, and be guaranteed a grandstand view of the execution when it took place. By 1868, it had been decided that such public spectacles had no place in a civilized society, and thereafter the hangings moved inside the prison, albeit crowds would still assemble outside on a day when a particularly notorious felon was to be executed, to await the hoisting of the black flag over the prison to tell them that the hanging had been carried out. Newgate Prison was closed in 1902, and the Central Criminal Court was built on its site, although some of the stone from the prison was used in its fabric. The building is surmounted by a dome to keep in with nearby St. Paul's Cathedral. On it stands the statue of Lady Justice, holding aloft the sword of retribution in her right hand and the scales of justice in her left. However, unlike other similar statues throughout the world, this one doesn't wear a blindfold, the reason being, according to the court's brochure, that her maidenly form guarantees her impartiality, thus rendering a blindfold redundant. On the opposite side of Newgate Street from the Old Bailey stands the Viaduct Tavern, built between 1872 and 1875, and a rare example of a late Victorian London gin palace. The interior is truly sumptuous. You can marvel at the ornate plaster ceiling, be dazzled by the abundance of brilliant cut glass, shiver at the stern plaster faces that gaze down at you from on high, and study the 3 allegorical paintings on canvas that depict vaguely classical females, each one a representation of the statues that adorn the nearby Holborn Viaduct for which the tavern is named. Should the desire take you, and providing you ask permission, you can also descend into the pub cellars, where a definite atmosphere hangs heavy in the air, although the claim that they were the cells of Newgate Prison is a fanciful one that I will say diplomatically might not be true. The pub does, however, hold the distinction of being the most haunted hostelry in the City of London. I've been collecting ghost stories about the Viaduct for nigh on 43 years, and I could regale you for hours with the ghostly goings-on at the pub, but since we have other places to visit, I'll just say that I've made an entire video about the ghosts of the Viaduct Tavern, and I'll put a link to it in the description below, and we shall turn our gaze on the magnificent building that stands opposite the Church of St. Sepulchre-without-Newgate, or Holy Sepulchre, London, as it is now known. It has the distinction of being the largest Anglican parish church in the City of London, and in medieval times it stood just outside the new gate of the City of London, hence its appellation without or outside Newgate. There's been a church on this site since at least the 12th century, if not long before that. Much of the current exterior dates from a rebuilding in the 15th century, although the interior was gutted by the Great Fire of London in September 1666. Tradition maintains it was a church that was going to be redesigned by Sir Christopher Wren, but he was so busy with other projects, such as nearby St. Paul's Cathedral, that they got fed up of waiting and asked somebody else to provide the design. That might be true, that might not be true, but it's a good story nonetheless. In the days when the hangings used to take place outside Newgate Prison opposite, it was the bell of St. Sepulchre's Church that used to toll from the tower to announce an execution. This is remembered in the rhyme, "Oranges and lemons say the bells of St. Clement's." It's the bells of St. Sepulchre's that toll out and say, "When will you pay me, say the bells of Old Bailey," a reference to the hangings in the square opposite, because when you paid the price of these bells, you paid the ultimate price by being executed. It's a roomy church inside, and it has several things that are worth stopping in to view. Captain John Smith, one of the founders and first governors of Jamestown, Virginia, was buried in the church following his death in 1631, and he is now commemorated by a beautiful stained glass window on the church's south wall. As you step inside the church, you pass this font cover that dates from 1690. It used to be inside the nearby church of Christ Church Greyfriars, but on the night of the 30th to the 31st of December 1940, that church was hit by a bomb, turning it into a raging inferno. A postman from the adjacent King Edward building raced into the blazing building and managed to rescue the font cover. Since Christ Church was never rebuilt, it has been inside the Church of the Holy Sepulchre ever since. There has long been a tradition that an underground tunnel once connected St. Sepulchre's with Newgate Prison opposite, via which the clergy of the church could make their way to administer to those in the condemned cell. When I began conducting tours of the area in 1982, there was a claim that the head of the tunnel could still be seen on the lower section of the church's south wall. Whether this ever was the entrance to a connecting tunnel between the church and Newgate Prison opposite is debatable, and nowadays it is simply used as a storage area. In a glass case opposite you will find a time-worn replica of the Newgate execution bell. The original, which is now locked securely away inside a safe, dates back to 1605, when Robert Dow, an alderman of the City of London, died and left £50 for the church to purchase a handbell, which the clerk of the church was to take to the condemned cell of Newgate Prison at midnight on the eve of an execution. Standing outside the cell, he would ring the bell to awake the condemned within, and he would then, in a loud voice, intone the following warning. "All you that in the condemned hole do lie, prepare you, for tomorrow you shall die. Watch all and pray, the hour is drawing near, that you before the Almighty must appear. Examine well yourselves, in time repent, that you may not to eternal flames be sent. And when St. Sepulchre's bell in the morning tolls, the Lord above have mercy on your souls." He would then stoop down and shout through the keyhole of the condemned cell, "Past 12 o'clock." Now just imagine, it's your last night on earth, so you're managing to get a bit of sleep and perhaps forget the nightmare that lies ahead, when suddenly a lunatic with a handbell stands outside your cell, rings it, wakes you up, and reminds you in rhyme no less about what's going to happen the next morning. A bizarre custom indeed. Moving back towards the Viaduct Tavern now, on the railings of the church on the left, we encounter another curious survivor from bygone London, albeit to reach it we have to negotiate one of the blights of the modern city, these rental bikes that are left strewn willy-nilly across the streets. But having clambered over and through them, it's all been worth it, because here on the fence is the first public drinking fountain placed here by the Metropolitan Free Drinking Fountain Association in 1859. Technically, I must put my hands up and say that last statement was incorrect. In fact, the fountain originally stood on the railings on the other side of the church at the top of Holborn Hill. However, the construction of the Holborn Viaduct in 1869 necessitated its removal to its current location. But it's the story that this humble fountain can tell us about Victorian London's water supply that has brought us here. In the 19th century, only a fortunate and wealthy few had their water piped into their houses. Most people depended on public pumps, wells, fountains, streams, or rivers. The problem was that the water was often horribly polluted by the effluent of what Dickens termed a great and dirty city, and people weren't that keen on drinking it. Instead, they would slake their thirsts however they saw fit, and as it happened, the cheapest and most readily available thirst-quenching beverages tended to be of the alcoholic variety. I mean, let's be honest, given the choice of slaking your thirst with water that looked, smelt and tasted like it had just come out of yours, or worse still, your neighbour's cesspit, which in the case of much of the 19th century water supply it almost certainly had, or quenching it with a tankard of frothing beer, well, be honest, which would you opt for? But of course, the problem with depending on alcoholic beverages to slake your thirst, let's just say that the results were predictable. You know how it is. One drink becomes two drinks become three, and before you know it, you're throwing your arms around total strangers and telling them you love them. What Victorian society needed more than anything else by the end of the 1850s was a white knight to come galloping into London armed with a bank balance large enough to provide free and pure water for all. And right on cue there came charging up Holborn Hill Mr. Samuel Gurney MP, a member of the Gurney banking dynasty, and a man with both the means and the determination to ensure that the people of London would never go thirsty again. Gurney's proposal was a simple and a generous one. He would personally fund a drinking fountain for the benefit of his fellow citizens. After a few false starts, the first of many such fountains was erected on the railings of St. Sepulchre's Church, and such was the excitement over the innovation that thousands of people turned out for the unveiling on the 21st of April, 1859. Thereafter, 2,000 or 3,000 people a day would stop to quench their thirsts at the fountain until the advent of piped water into people's houses rendered it redundant. Nowadays, this relic of the past often goes unnoticed by passers-by, and even those who do notice it probably don't realise the part it played in making life in London an altogether more pleasant experience. Notice the replace the cup instruction. Until very recently, 2 tin cups were chained to the basin of the fountain, but for some reason they disappeared a few years ago. Fortunately, I had already filmed them, so please take a few moments to admire them as I scramble over the bikes and we head off along Giltspur Street. Giltspur Street was formerly called Knight Rider Street, a name derived from the fact that knights used to ride along here en route to and back from jousts and tournaments that used to be held on the Smithfield or Smithfield, to which we shall head very shortly. On the wall on the left is a bust of Charles Lamb, essayist, poet and antiquarian, whose best-known work today is probably his Tales from Shakespeare, for which he and his sister Mary cut out all the naughty bits from the plays so that children could enjoy them without embarrassing their parents. Lamb was educated at Christ's Hospital, a school that used to stand on the opposite side of the road from where the bust now is. Situated next to Charles Lamb is an 18th century watch house, which is now a desirable residence, although its origins are rooted in the darker side of London's history. There was a time when, having shuffled off this mortal coil, if you were laid to rest in one of the city's churchyards, the chances were that you wouldn't stay there for that long. Doctors, surgeons, medical students and scientists were desperate for human bodies for the purposes of expanding their knowledge of physiology and anatomy. To cater for the demand, the Bodysnatchers would venture into London's burial grounds by night and dig up the bodies of the newly dead, which they would then sell to medical men at a handsome profit. Churches, of course, were not at all happy at the prospect of their former parishioners being unable to rest in peace, and so they took various precautions to ensure that the bodies of the dearly departed remained safely in the bosom of God's good earth. St. Sepulchre's built this watch-house next to the entrance to its burial ground and employed a night watchman to keep a close eye on the toings and throwings without. And he was instructed to send the Bodysnatchers packing should they be tempted to try and steal the cadavers from this churchyard. The watch-house dates from 1791, albeit it was destroyed by bombing in 1941 and rebuilt in 1962. Continuing along Giltspur Street, on the other side of the road we see the place where many of those bodies may well have ended up, St. Bartholomew's Hospital, one of Western Europe's oldest hospitals to still stand on its original site. There's been a hospital here since 1123, although the buildings have been rebuilt several times over the centuries. It still is an active hospital, and it has many interesting associations and tales to tell, and we shall return to it shortly. However, we have now come to the corner of Cock Lane, one of the more intriguingly named thoroughfares in the City of London, and so called because it was once a major red light district. It was on this corner, then known as Pie Corner, that the Great Fire of London burnt itself out in this section of the city in September 1666. When the fire had destroyed 9/10 of their city, Londoners sought a supernatural reason. Why? Why had God allowed the city to burn down? They found the answer here at Pie Corner. Of course, they reasoned, the fire began at Pudding Lane, it finished at Pie Corner. Clearly, it's a sign from God that he has punished us for the sin of gluttony, overindulgence. And so to commemorate the punishment, they put up on the wall the golden boy or the fat boy of Pie Corner, and beneath him it reads, "This boy is in memory put up for the late fire of London, occasioned by the sin of gluttony, 1666. He used to adorn the wall of a public house called the Fortune of War, the principal house north of the river for the aforementioned Bodysnatchers. They would bring the freshly dug up cadavers to the pub, and the landlord would arrange them on benches in the upstairs room. Surgeons and doctors from St. Bartholomew's Hospital would come over to the pub, select which bodies they wanted, and pay the required fee to the landlord, who would then take his commission and pass the remainder on to the Bodysnatchers. But now we're going to leave Pie Corner and we're going to cross over Giltspur Street towards St. Bartholomew's Hospital. Up ahead is the former pathology department of the hospital, famed amongst fans of Sherlock Holmes as the location where Holmes and Watson met on New Year's Day 1881 in the very first story, A Study in Scarlet. There used to be a plaque on the wall inside commemorating the auspicious meeting, albeit the plaque has now been moved to the hospital's museum, which sadly, due to construction work, is currently closed. I did, however, film it whilst the museum was open, and so take a few moments now to admire the plaque that commemorates one of literature's most famous meetings. Avid viewers of the BBC series Sherlock might recognise this as the building from the roof of which Sherlock Holmes, or Benedict Cumberbatch playing Sherlock Holmes, leapt to his death at the end of Series 2 and fell flailing through the air to land in a crumpled heap on the pavement here, where an assortment of horrified onlookers raced to render what little assistance they could to the broken body that, until just a few minutes before, had housed the mind of the world's greatest ever consulting detective. Farewell, Sherlock Holmes, and hello, fans of Sherlock from all over the world, who for several years after the death scene aired in 2012 made pilgrimages to the spot at which the great detective had been taken from them in such brutal fashion. Clearly visible in the scene was this phone box, which the fans turned into a shrine to their hero by leaving messages to him on its door and windows. Messages such as "I don't shave for Sherlock Holmes," "John Watson Moustache Appreciation Society," "You really did it very well," "Finland believes in Sherlock, Moriarty was real," and so on and so on. But it's here at the phone box outside the Hospital of St. Bartholomew that the curtain comes down on part 1 of our tour. In part 2, we'll push on into West Smithfield and explore the alleyways and streets around there. But for now, I hope you've enjoyed this section of the tour, and I'm now off to grieve the loss of Sherlock Holmes. Till we meet again, dear viewer.